Well, good morning. It is good to be back in the UK. I don't think my mic's on. I was busy. Well, let's try that. Are we better? Okay, let's get some honesty here, folks. I need a show of hands. How many of you like to argue? You are all liars. All right, how about this? When you argue, you want to win. If your hand's not up, there's something sick about you. There's something really wrong. If you like losing arguments, we need to talk. We're going to talk about arguing during my sessions, and I'm going to tell you why, men and women. We are all apologists now. Let me define what an apologist is. An apologist is not someone who runs around and says he's sorry all the time. That's what husbands do. An apologist, listen to the ladies going, preach it, bro. This is great stuff. I'll fix you later. An apologist is someone who makes a case for what he or she believes. You give reasons for what you believe. And the way the culture is changing before our very eyes is so dramatic that the days of believing that you can leave the defense of the pro-life view to a handful of paid professionals who do all the work for us, those days are gone. We are all going to have to step up and become very adept at arguing. And to illustrate this, I want to relay something I mentioned the last time I was here, but I think it's so appropriate, I'm going to risk repeating it again for the sake of those of you that weren't here last time. On the first visit I made here to do the Clarkson Academy in 2012, I brought with me my 15-year-old son, Michael. He was 15 at the time. And when Andy wasn't busy working me to death, I actually had a day off. Rare, working with Andy, but I had a day off. And so I went to the Imperial War Museum over on the south side of the Thames River there. How many of you have been there? You've ever been to the Imperial? You need to go. It's phenomenal. If you're a history buff like me, eye candy everywhere. They have a Spitfire hanging from the ceiling, the plane that saved the West in 1940. And I took Michael there, and I was preparing to enter the Imperial War Museum, and we were so early they didn't open the doors yet. But they had a display out in front for everybody who had arrived early. It was a display of the evacuees. You know who the evacuees were, right? In London in 1940, when Hitler began bombing the city, Churchill sent all the children out of London on trains. And you've seen the photographs of them, the black and white photos. Little tiny children standing on the platforms at Waterloo and Charing Cross and King's Cross and elsewhere. And they're standing there with their little numbers, some of them as young as 2. And many of them will never see their parents again because the parents will be killed. And I was explaining this to Michael. And as I was, an older woman in her late 70s tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned and leaned down to hear what she had to say, and she pointed to one of the pictures and said I was one of those children. And, you know, of course, I grabbed Michael by the lapels and yanked him over and said, "We will be listening to what this woman has to tell us." And she proceeded to tell her story. She said, yeah, in August of 1940, my parents put me on the train, and that was the last time I ever saw them. Whoa, how old were you? 4. How long till they were killed? 11 days after they dropped her at the station. I said, what happened to you? She got a smile on her face, and she said, oh, I had a good life. The family that took me in, listen to her words, just stepped up and adopted me. At that point, I'm bawling. And Michael's bawling because I got him by the neck. But listen to those choice of words. They just stepped up and adopted me. It is time for every one of us to step up and do our duty. If you go to Trafalgar Square and you stand there under the monument to Lord Nelson, you will see these words, England expects that every man will do his duty. It looked like a hopeless situation, but with a little creative genius and a willingness to fight, a battle was won. We have to step up and do our duty, men and women, and that means we are all stepping up to make a case for what we believe. We've got to argue it. And by arguing, I mean laying out a case that's both persuasive and winsome. We not only have the right things to say, we say it in a winsome manner that engages people and allows the truth of what we're saying to be heard. You'll hear a lot about that this week or this weekend. The pictures are indispensable to changing people at the feeling level. And I would go so far as to say that used correctly, not only are the pictures acceptable, they're actually a way to win. You can win using the pictures. They help you come off as persuasive and winsome, believe it or not. We don't have to choose between telling people the truth and having them like us. We can do both. And that's what this weekend is going to be about. Here are the 4 tasks of a pro-life apologist. And I will spend my time with you clarifying these 4 tasks. Here they are. If you're an effective pro-life apologist, number 1, you clarify the debate. You clarify it. And this first session, that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at what the debate is about and what it's not about. Because a lot of pro-lifers are off message. They're not talking about what this debate is truly about. Second thing you do, you make a case for your view using science and philosophy. Why am I not going to use theology as my primary way of making my case? Anybody want to venture a guess? What kind of culture do you live in here in Great Britain, and do I largely live in the United States? A postmodern culture that thinks religious truth is a mere preference like choosing chocolate ice cream over vanilla. If you were to say to that culture, abortion's wrong because the Bible says so, and that's your primary argument, what just happened to your case? Dismissed, because people don't think religious truth claims count as real knowledge. They think they're mere preferences. So we're not going to start there. We'll go ahead and start with science and philosophy. Third thing a pro-life apologist does, you answer objections persuasively. You learn to hear the objection, hear it through a particular grid that enables you to simplify the objection and respond accordingly. And what we'll do, starting today and into tomorrow, we will look at 5 bad ways people generally argue about abortion and give you the tools you need to expose them and respond accordingly. Fourth thing a pro-life apologist does, you teach and equip. You don't just take the knowledge that you get and think that's nice, put that on your mental mantle in your head. No, you take it and you go out and speak. How many of you have ever done a public speech? Can I see your hands? That's going to change. That's right. You're going to have to step up and be willing to communicate your views, and you will have the tools you need to begin doing that when we're done. So those are the 4 tasks of a pro-life apologist. Let's begin by why we ought to do this. First of all, it's Christ honoring. I'm assuming that the vast majority of you come from a Christian viewpoint. If you believe that the Scripture has authority over the believer's life, one of the commands of Scripture we find in 1 Peter 3:15 goes like this: always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. Christianity is not wishing. Christianity is not blind faith. It's trust based on evidence. I had faith that the plane I took from Atlanta to here would get me here. But it wasn't blind faith. Now it might have been, given the airline was Delta. You know what Delta is for, right? Don't expect luggage to arrive, you know? But I had faith the airplane would get me here. Why did I have faith? Well, I looked up in the cockpit. There's 2 guys with uniforms on who have hundreds of hours of flying experience and know how to operate that airplane. Secondly, I'm with an airline that has an excellent safety reputation, if not a luggage one. Thirdly, the equipment is state-of-the-art. This is not ancient stuff. We're flying on state-of-the-art equipment. Fourthly, there's history. I know that when you fly, you are traveling in the most safe way possible, much safer than driving. So I had faith the plane would get me here, but that faith was really trust based on evidence. It wasn't a blind leap in the dark. When we as Christians defend our views, whether we're doing it with the pro-life view or Christianity in general, we are not merely stepping up and saying, believe what we believe because we just believe it in spite of the evidence. That's not what the Bible teaches. We are defending what we believe and pointing people to evidence for the hope that lies within us. And as Christians, that's why we need to do this. There's a second biblical reason we need to do it, though. And that is, we should never assume someone else is going to do it for us. The parable of the Good Samaritan is, of course, a parable you all know. A man is beaten and left for dead. Two religious leaders walk by on the other side of the road, and only the Good Samaritan loves his neighbor by taking pity on him, not just feeling pity. And Christ said that's love. As Christians, we step up and love our unborn neighbor, and we don't assume someone else is going to do the defense of him for us. We do it. So those are the biblical reasons we do what we do. Let's talk about clarifying the debate. Everybody write down this syllogism I'm about to give you. If you're freaked out by that word syllogism, it's simply a formal argument. A premise, conclusion. You ready? Here's the syllogism. And we're going to memorize this syllogism before we're done. In fact, we're locking the doors until everybody can recite it. Here it is, premise 1. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. If you want to make this easy, just put P1, colon, and then write the premise. P1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. That is called a syllogism. Can everybody say that magical word? I want to hear it. Syllogism. I want that to roll off your tongue and feel good and not feel awkward. We are going to come back to this syllogism again and again and again, and let me tell you why. If you listen to pro-life advocates, particularly in my country, I haven't heard it quite as much here, but if you listen to U.S. pro-life leaders, and if you listen carefully enough, I would be able to challenge you to find at least 10 to 12 different message streams that are going out. We don't have a single message, we got a bunch of them. And what does that result in? Confusion in the culture. People don't know what it is we're truly arguing. We want to make a very basic argument that is very clear. Nobody is guessing what we're arguing. It's right there. Clarifying this debate is absolutely essential. Premise 1, it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. Let's go a step further, though, and define abortion. How many of us argue against abortion, but we don't define what it is? I was at a homeschool conference in the States 2 years ago, and I don't know how it is here, but in the U.S., homeschooling children tend to be very conservative, very anti-evolution, very pro-7-day young earth creationism, all of which fine. But one of the speakers at this homeschool conference was a Christian apologist by the name of Sean McDowell. He's a friend of mine. His dad is Josh McDowell, the great Christian apologist who wrote books like More Than a Carpenter. And Sean stood up in front of this group of 700 homeschool students and he said, "How many of you oppose evolution?" They all raised their hand. And then he said, "Okay, I'm going to do a role play with you." He turned his back to them, put on some funny glasses, and played the role of an atheist. He said, "All right, how many of you don't believe in evolution?" Everybody's hand went up. He said, "Tell me what it is." How many students do you think were able to tell him what evolution was? Zippo, but they were against it. We need to be able to define abortion. Remember, our goal here is clarity, so let's define it. Here it is. Abortion is the intentional killing of a human fetus, or more specifically, the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. This definition is going to get us out of a lot of trouble later on when people bring up objections to our case and they try to trap us. Well, what about the life of the mother? What about ectopic pregnancy? Let's go back to definitions and see if we can't work our way out of these dilemmas. And the truth is we can, if we're clear on what our definitions are. Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Here's what the abortion debate is not about. Ready? I'll be stepping on some toes here, all right? I decided to get all of you hating me in the first session, and then I'll rebuild the relationship over time. We bring over a speaker from US and he causes international incident. Okay, here's what the abortion debate is not about. It is not about stories. The New York Times, about 6 months ago, ran a headline piece about how both sides of the abortion debate are running to find women who've had abortions to tell their stories in hopes of capturing the PR mindset. Here's what's wrong with stories. You got your story, I got my story. Why is mine not better than yours? We are now in the subjective realm, not the objective realm. And now we have dueling stories. Oh, and by the way, when the media is not on our side, if the debate gets reduced to stories, whose stories are going to be heard? Not ours. Which means this debate is not about telling stories, though I'm not against telling stories. What I'm saying is it's not our primary way of arguing. I heard a pro-life leader in the States at a major pro-life conference a year and a half ago say the following: the way we're going to win this debate is we are going to tell the stories of women who've had abortions, and those stories are going to be moved to the forefront of the debate. And I sat there cringing in my seat saying, you've got to be kidding me. That's not going to win the debate. Think of our syllogism. What's our argument? Abortion is wrong because it's the intentional killing of an innocent human being. We've got to focus on that like a laser beam. Second thing this debate is not about. It is not about gender perspectives. The cultural left in the Western world wants to reduce everything to personal perspectives. We want a woman's perspective on abortion. In fact, I remember, I think it was Ruth, wasn't it, that did a debate here, a year ago, where it was about, tell me the title of that debate. It was about, should men have a voice on, or should there, should men be able to debate about abortion? And the idea being that, no, this is a woman's perspective that's needed. Let me clarify something for a moment. There is no woman's perspective on abortion any more than there's an uncle's perspective on abortion. By the way, there's no single perspective on abortion you could point to anyway that's dominant. Feminists don't have a single perspective on abortion. There are pro-life feminists and there are pro-choice feminists. But even among the abortion choice feminists, they don't all agree. For example, feminist Naomi Wolf calls abortion a real death and says we ought to call it that. While feminist Katha Pollitt says abortion is no different than vacuuming out your house. No big deal. Even among those who support abortion, there's no single perspective. So how can we say that there's a woman's perspective that we're supposed to all get in line with and everybody else is out of the debate? A third thing this debate is not about. This one's going to get a little risky for me. It's not about women regretting their abortions. How many of you have seen a sign that says, I regret my abortion? Have you seen those signs? What's the fastest rebuttal to that sign? A woman holding a sign that says, I don't regret mine. And for every woman you find who regrets her abortion, I'll find you 3 who don't. Abortion is not wrong because women feel bad about it. Abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being. Now, is it the case that women do have abortions and often do feel bad about it, and we should tell their stories? Absolutely. But to say we're going to make that the primary focus of our pro-life apologetic is a huge error. Our primary message is that syllogism I gave you. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. Another thing this debate is not about. It's not about religion. There's two sides to this. Let me give you the opponent's side. Our opponents look at our argument and they say, your view is religious, and they dismiss it. How many of you have heard people say that? Your pro-life view is religious. And as if that ends the debate. Can I give a very simple logic observation here? Arguments are true or false, valid or invalid. Calling an argument religious is a category error, like asking how tall is the number 5. It has no bearing on whether the argument is good or bad. You can't just call an argument a name and think you've carried the day. You've got to refute the pro-life syllogism. You've got to refute premise 1, that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, or refute premise 2, that abortion does that, or show that the conclusion doesn't follow. Calling our argument religious does nothing to refute it. So why am I taking so much time to keep bringing you back to this syllogism? In fact, you'll be so sick of it, you'll be hearing it in your sleep. You're going to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning tonight, and you're going to be hearing syllogism, 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 and I know I will have done my job at that point. Why am I doing this to you? In part because I enjoy torturing you, but secondly, I don't want you distracted by people who don't have the courage to actually belly up to the bar and refute what we're saying. They're going to have to do some hard work. I'm not going to let them get away with simply dismissing our case with a label and thinking they can walk on it. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons the pictures are so important. Greg puts it well. When you show pictures of abortion, abortion protests itself. One of the reasons we use pictures is to keep people on message, to keep them focused on that premise that abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. The pictures are not used in place of good evidence. They're used as part of our case to point people to the truth we're communicating and to do it at a very visceral level. So we want to keep you focused on that particular syllogism, on that particular point that abortion is the unjust killing of a human being, and calling our argument religious won't do the trick. All right, so let's lay out our pro-life case. I've given you a syllogism. Let's begin the job of defending it. I'm going to make a brief case for the pro-life view. Then I'm going to spend the rest of my time with you unpacking the 5 bad ways people are going to argue against that case and why they don't work, so that you're equipped for it. When you're standing out at that display this afternoon, you will hear many of these 5 bad ways that I'm talking about. We won't get to them before we go to the display because I'll be finishing them up tomorrow, but you will hear them, and then when we cover them tomorrow, you go, oh yeah, I think I heard that. I heard that. That sounds familiar. Here's the actual case we're making, and I'm going to give you the pro-life argument in a minute or less. Somebody got a watch? You got to watch? Okay, I want you to time me in a minute when I say go. I want you, when somebody asks, why are you pro-life, to be able to make your case in 1 minute or less. And it's doable. That reporter comes up to you, you're at your display down in Brighton. She comes up to you and says, why are you out here? What are you doing? Why are you pro-life? Why are you anti-choice? Whatever she says. Here's going to be your answer. Ready? Set, go. Miss Reporter, I am pro-life because the science of embryology teaches us that from the earliest stages of development, the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. You didn't come from an embryo, you once were one. And there's no ethical difference between that embryo you once were and the adult you are today that justifies killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying you could be killed then but not now. How'd I do?
Just over half a minute.
Just over half a minute.
35
35 seconds. That puts me at first in the lunch line, I think. That's good. All right. Now, let me ask you a question. How many Bible verses did I cite in that argument? How many appeals to emotion did I make? How many subjective stories did I tell? Was there an argument in that soundbite? Yes, there was. And did I give some evidence for the argument, even though I didn't unpack it in full detail? Yes. And you know what's the beauty of that? My critic now has to answer the case I've made. Maybe I'm wrong, but you're not going to demonstrate I'm wrong by simply dismissing me with a label. Step up, show me where I'm wrong. In other words, you're laying down the gauntlet. You're giving people a challenge to have to step up and show where you're wrong. So let's go through that pro-life argument and see if we can defend it. How about this? Do you think many people are going to challenge the premise that it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings? Not a lot. I mean, there will be a few, but by and large, nobody's going to challenge that. But do you think people will argue against your claim that abortion is the intentional killing of a human being? Yeah, a lot will. What if you had at your disposal sources not that were pro-life, but were pro-abortion who claimed that's true? Do you think that would be helpful? Well, indeed, we do have such sources, and you will get these in your notes. Catherine alluded to this. You're going to get notes from me that are extensive. Some of you are already writing faster than broke people at a money seminar. That's fine if you want to do that, but you don't have to. You can actually wait for the notes if you prefer. I want you to listen to just some of these quotes, not from pro-life sources, but from pro-abortion sources that argue abortion is the intentional killing of a human fetus. All right? Here goes. Dr. Warren Hearn, author of the book Abortion Practice, which is the medical teaching text that teaches doctors how to perform abortions. Here's what he said at a Planned Parenthood medical seminar. He says, quote, speaking of the abortion procedure, "We have reached a point in this particular technology," meaning D&E abortions, that's dismemberment abortions. "We have reached a particular point in this particular technology where there is no possibility of denying an act of destruction. It is before one's eyes." And then listen to this sentence. "The sensations of dismemberment flow through the forceps like an electric current." Whoa, I didn't say that. America's leading abortionist said that. And he said it at a Planned Parenthood conference. Journal entry. This is in the journal California Medicine, very prestigious medical journal. And here is a quote from 1970. All right? Listen to this. And by the way, this journal is very favorable to abortion. Quote, "Since the old ethic has not been fully displaced, it has been necessary to separate the idea of abortion from the idea of killing, which continues to be socially abhorrent. The result has been a curious avoidance of the scientific fact, which everyone really knows, that human life begins at conception and is continuous, whether intrauterine or extrauterine, until death. The very considerable semantic gymnastics which are required to rationalize abortion is anything but taking a human life would be ludicrous if they were not often put forth under socially impeccable auspices. It is suggested that the schizophrenic sort of subterfuge is necessary because while the new ethic is being accepted, the old one hasn't been rejected." Does that sound like a concession that abortion is intentional killing? Yeah? It gets better. Ronald Dworkin, author of a book entitled Life's Dominion, an intellectual who goes around the world speaking on defense of abortion, among other things, says this in his book: "Abortion deliberately kills a developing embryo and is a choice for death." How's that for clarity? Faye Wattleton, former president of Planned Parenthood: "I think we delude ourselves into believing that people don't know that abortion is killing. So any pretense that abortion is not killing is a signal of our ambivalence, a signal that we cannot say, yes, it kills a fetus." I go on. Naomi Wolf, prominent feminist, writes in the New Republic, clinging to a rhetoric about abortion in which there is no life and no death, we entangle our beliefs in a series of self-delusions, fibs, and evasions, and we risk becoming precisely what our critics charge us with being: callous, selfish, casually destructive men and women who share a cheapened view of human life. We need to contextualize the fight to defend abortion rights within a moral framework that admits that the death of a fetus is a real death. One more. Camille Paglia, arguably America's most outspoken feminist, writes the following: hence, I have always frankly admitted that abortion is murder, the extermination of the powerless by the powerful. Liberals, for the most part, have shrunk from facing the ethical consequences of their embrace of abortion, which results in the annihilation of concrete individuals and not just clumps of insensate tissue. Whoa, these aren't pro-life apologists saying this. Anne Ferretti, a piece I will quote for you later today or tomorrow, in a journal article I read, actually a newspaper article of hers from a couple of years ago, flat out says the idea that you can draw a meaningful line between a fetus in the womb and one that's outside the womb is completely nuts. Development doesn't bestow value. She's making our claim at this point. So when we make the claim that abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being, we don't have to rely strictly on pro-life sources to make this. The other side is conceding it to us. Let's go on. How do we then use science to make our case that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings? Here's how we do it. We invite people to see that there is a difference between, this sounds complex, but we'll simplify it, that there's a difference between parts and wholes. Everybody hold your hand like this for a moment. Go ahead and start pinching some cells off the back of your hand. Give yourself a good pinch. If your neighbor hasn't had any coffee and he's kind of on the nod, go ahead and pinch the back of his neck and extract the cells back there. Talk about being a pain in the neck. No, anyway, all right. You just sent a couple of hundred somatic cells hurling to their deaths on the notes in front of you. Every one of those cells contains your DNA encoding. Did you just commit mass murder? It's getting awfully quiet in here. You didn't, and you know why. These cells on the back of your hand are merely part of a larger human entity, you. They are not distinct whole human beings the way you were when you were an embryo, the way I was when I was an embryo. There is a difference in kind between each of our bodily cells and the embryonic human beings we once were. Every credible embryology textbook in the world will back up what I just told you. And in the notes that you're going to get, I have footnoted all those sources for you. Did I mention you're going to get extensive notes? You will owe me big time when this is all done. You are going to get notes with footnotes. You're going to get notes with exhaustive explanations. So if you're listening to me right now and go, wow, that just went right by me, you can raise your hand and interrupt me during the Q&A. That'll be fine. I'll reiterate it. But you also need to know you're going to walk home with that in your hands. And you will have digital copies of it, I believe. Is that right, Catherine? Are we printing them or giving them? What's that? Perfect. That's exactly the way to do it. In fact, tomorrow you can all bring your notes on your phones or laptops, whatever you want. If I catch any of you on Facebook when I'm lecturing, you will lose your salvation. And that's coming from a Calvinist. That's really strange. But anyway, moving right along. That was a joke, an attempt to bond with my audience, and I think it went down faster than an Obama speech. But anyway, the science of embryology is clear that from the earliest stages of development, we are distinct, living, and whole human beings. You didn't come from an embryo. You once were an embryo. Here's a good question to ask people, just to trick them. Did you evolve from an embryo? What are most of them going to say? Yeah, that evolution thing's really cool, isn't it? No, you didn't evolve from an embryo. You once were one. By the way, Abortion choice philosopher David Boonin, who we will talk about later, agrees with us on this. He says, you and I are identical to the embryos we once were. And to illustrate his point, he talks about his own son Eli. Listen to what he says. David Boonin, who I believe, by the way, is the best the other side has to offer. He's the most thoughtful, persuasive guy they got. He's the best. Here's what he writes. He says, on this desk where I wrote most of this book, meaning his book, A Defense of Abortion, there are a series of photographs of my son Eli. In one photograph, Eli is about 9 months old, and he's struggling to sit up in his grandparents' backyard. In a second photograph, he's about 6 months old, and he's at the beach, and the breeze is blowing his hair, and it's wisping in the breeze. In a third photograph, he is only a few hours after birth, and he's got a blanket around his head to preserve body heat. In each of these pictures, says Boonin, we are looking at the same little boy. Then Boonin says this, in the top drawer of my desk, I keep another photograph of Eli. This one taken 24 weeks before he was born. The sonogram image is murky, but it reveals clearly enough a hand bent toward the mouth, thumb extended toward the lips. And there is no doubt in my mind, says Boonin, that this picture also depicts the same little boy, only at an earlier stage of his development. And, says Boonin, there is no doubt that the thesis I advance in this book is that it would have been perfectly permissible to have ended his life at that point. Talk about biting the bullet. He concedes everything to us. Pro-lifers, you're right. Abortion intentionally kills a human fetus. You're right that embryo back there was you. And I'll kill you anyway back then because you lack cortical brain function and hence have no desires, a point we'll come back to in a little bit. But notice he concedes the science. You and I did not come from embryos. We once were embryos. Now, there will be people who raise objections to this. So let's walk through some of the objections people will throw out to try to refute this case that the unborn are distinct, living, whole human beings. The first thing they'll do is they will throw out the twinning objection. Any of you twins here? Anybody had twins? You're a twin? Really? There's two of you. Ever feel like you wish you could split? No, I'm kidding. Now, here's the argument. You pro-lifers say that we're distinct, living, whole human beings from the very beginning. Well, what about twinning? That embryo can split into two, somewhere between 14 and 21 days gestation. How can you say then that from the very beginning, that's a distinct, whole living human being when twinning can occur? All right, scholars, somebody help me out with this. How might you approach this? Anybody want to venture out a little bit early on? I am known for giving away prizes to brave people and for calling out those who need courage. All right, sir.
Would it be a distinct human being before it splits, and after it splits, it becomes two distinct?
Okay. How does it follow that because a living organism may split into two, that it wasn't a whole living human being prior to the split? Do I have your point correctly? Yeah. Okay. Do you have flatworms in the UK? I don't mean that boring cousin of yours. I mean, do you have flatworms? Flatworms, we have them in the States in the South. They're this worm that doesn't have much of an arch to it, and if you cut one in half, what do you get? Two worms. Does it follow there was no single worm prior to the split? So the fact that an entity may split does not mean it wasn't a whole living entity prior to the split. Everybody with me so far? Oh, by the way, if an embryo is not a full human being because a twin can be formed from it, and a twin can be formed from any of you, through cloning technology, it follows none of you are fully human either, right? And by the way, that's coming. That's not a question of if, it's just when. Where they will be able to take a somatic cell, vacate the DNA of it, slap donor DNA in there, jolt it into reproducing, and you've got a clone. That if it was your DNA that's inserted, comes from you. Which means if the embryo isn't human because a twin can be formed from it, and a twin can be formed from you, none of us are human, right? This is a very vacuous argument, but very popular. Second objection you'll get is the miscarriage objection. And it goes like this. Nature is the biggest abortionist in the planet because nature causes up to a half of all conceptions to spontaneously abort before the woman even knows she's pregnant. And if nature is the biggest abortionist on the planet, why are you pro-lifers so worried about it? Have you heard this argument before? Yeah. This is a classic example of the is-ought fallacy. And it goes like this. Just because something is the case doesn't mean it ought to be. Earthquakes happen in third world countries and kill hundreds of thousands of people. Does that justify mass murder? The fact that nature causes something doesn't follow that anything normative can be known. How does it follow that because nature spontaneously triggers a miscarriage that A, the embryos in question are not human, and B, we may intentionally kill them? This is vacuous reasoning, but you will hear some very smart people making these kinds of claims. Did any of you watch Bill Nye, the Science Guy's video? Do you know who Bill Nye is? I'm glad most of you don't. It's really not worth your time, except that he is immensely popular in the States and in Canada because he does this TV show on public broadcasting where he trumpets the virtues of science. And by the way, it's not really science he's trumpeting. It's secular materialism. It's a worldview disguised as science. But he did this thing last week on abortion where he attempted to disprove the pro-life view. And this is one of the arguments that came out of that. This ridiculous notion that because nature causes something, we ought to be able to do it intentionally. Third objection. Women don't grieve miscarriages the way they grieve the death of a newborn or a toddler. Therefore, our intuitions tell us that abortion's no big deal. What were you saying? Yes, and you're right. Peter's right. We could go down the road of saying, well, we know women who do grieve, and you know what? You're correct. Here's what I would say, though. Let's go ahead and grant the point for the sake of argument. Women don't grieve, though I don't believe that, but let's grant it for the sake of argument. How does my feeling about something change what it is? Suppose I get a text message during the break that we're going to take here shortly. Suppose I got a text message that said one of my own children has died. Am I going to feel worse about that than finding out that 500 children died in India today from malnutrition? Does it follow my own child is more human than those kids? My feelings about something don't change what it is. Even if we grant that women don't grieve miscarriages the way they grieve the death of a newborn or toddler, it doesn't follow the unborn are not human. These are bad ways to argue, and people do it all the time. Now, we're going to take a break now. In my next session, I will wrap up with some of the scientific objections. We'll lay out the philosophic case for the pro-life view, and then we will begin working through the 5 bad ways people argue against that pro-life case. But before you go to get food, what are the 3 key words of this training for this weekend? Syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. Can I spell syllogism? S-Y-L-L-O-G-I-S-M. Syllogism. Fair request. Now, Before you get to go, tell me what the syllogism is. Premise 1. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2.
Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being.
Conclusion.
Therefore, abortion is wrong.
You guys are such arguers. Go have a break.